Welcome to Emotional Sobriety.
It's funny. I watched a movie yesterday with my girlfriend where a guy has a
Mm-hmm.
meltdown in an office,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just spectacular. It starts with he walks in with his shirt untucked, and then
Mm-hmm.
you just know things are about to go sideways from there. But yeah, it got me to reflect on the last office that I worked in, the full 9 to 5 office.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was where I got let go because I kept showing up loaded. It's been a little bit of time, so I've been able to get some distance from it, and obviously a bunch of stuff has happened. But that shame is like right there under the ice, like
Yeah.
I'm learning to hack it at other things
Mm-hmm.
besides being a functional member of an office culture. I think I'll always just have a little bit of chip on my shoulder about that, like, damn, I just couldn't fit in. I was like too out of my mind.
You're not alone. I never pulled it off. It's like no, I was fired or quit just about every job I ever had, and it's like that. I don't think I lasted that more than 2 years. I'm not sure I could do it sober either.
I don't know about you, but maybe part of the positive reframe that comes from this type of thing. Hats off to the people who do manage it. There is always a tension with it, with that. It's like between
Mm-hmm.
like your personal identity and
Mm-hmm.
whatever the thing is that they're trying to turn
Mm-hmm.
you into to monetize.
It just shows how I'm still judgmental as hell as an old man. When you said hats off to the people who do that. And the first guy that spoke in my head just went dweebs. It's
Yeah. Oh, and you know what Joke told me? The January issue of AA Grapevine, there are only 4 articles within that issue that specifically pertain to emotional sobriety. But he gave us a
Mhm.
compliment is that we have to date been able to find the emotional sobriety in all the articles that we've been reading.
I just wrote this. I meant to send it to you, as a matter of fact. Emotional sobriety is a philosophy to be applied, not a goal to be reached. Emotional sobriety is a daily practice that requires our conscious attention to the details of how we are responding both interpersonally and intrapersonally to the world we inhabit. In other words, emotional sobriety calls for us to accept full responsibility, not only for our behavioral responses, but also for how we interpret our experiences. Emotional sobriety provides new perspectives and specific techniques that afford us opportunities to change from the inside out. Emotional sobriety teaches and reminds us daily that the mind, your mind and my mind, is all that we control. Emotional sobriety engages us in rational thinking, compassion for self and others, and challenges us to clearly define our beliefs and values. It's a philosophy that we apply. So we
Yeah.
should be able to take anything and put that lens over it. Well, and Allen talks about that, but it's the lens you look at it for. Well, I'm a recovering alcoholic and I'm a recovering asshole, and recovery of one of those without the other is a dry drunk, and a dry drunk is somebody who's not emotionally sober.
I'm not going to call the episode Fishing Heaven. Sometimes I make the title of the article the title of the episode, but
Mm-hmm.
when the title is not our podcasty enough, I usually adjust. So
Hey, the big catch would work.
I always, when I saw this title, I thought of that movie Gone Fishing with Joe Pesci and Danny Glover. Did you ever see that?
Yeah,
uh,
gone fishing. That's a good one. That's a
yeah,
good title. Yeah.
yeah, it's pleasant. Okay, so I'll get it started. Fishing Heaven by Steve G. from Rockville, Maryland. Whether it's the lessons we get to learn or the love we give, living life sober is the big catch. I had recently returned from Montana, where I learned to fly fish for trout. My friend John said he knew of a place to put in his canoe and fish for common bluegills. With my expensive state-of-the-art fly rod and wearing the obligatory fly fisherman's gadget-filled vest, I was over-equipped for such a humble fish, but bluegills would be good practice for honing my skill at casting. All I lacked was humility. John was right about the fishing. I caught them by the dozen, while John paddled and steered the canoe. The plan was for us to switch places so that he would have a turn at the fishing. But he never got that far. To make a longer cast, I stood up in the canoe and promptly fell overboard. I can still see the look of terror on John's face as he struggled to keep the boat from capsizing. Gadgets were floating from my vest and drifting off with the current, but I was concentrating on getting a handhold on the canoe while John steered it to shore. He'd brought his 4-year-old son, who until then had been furiously chatting away. Now he was speechless. He no doubt sensed that something momentous had occurred.
It was March and the water was cold. Back in the car with the heater on full blast, I joked with the boy that I had jumped in on purpose, but he was having none of that. He knew a good fall when he saw one. Back at John's house, I put on some of his dry clothing, which was much too large and only added to the comic effect. I confessed to being a fool for standing in the boat. No one contradicted me. John never asked me to go fishing again. but we remained good friends. John and I had met through our Sunday night AA meeting. I had been sober 2 years. We would stay after the meeting and talk about AA. Then we discussed our mutual love of fishing, and he disclosed that he owned a canoe. When he asked me to be his AA sponsor, I was in fishing heaven.
Then came the canoe incident. As John's sponsor, I wanted him to learn the lesson from my accident, namely that I had been engaging in egotistical behavior, otherwise known as showing off, and deserved what I got. The lesson was not lost on him. He wouldn't have been silly enough to try it in the first place. Just when I thought his AA program was going well, John's wife asked him to move out of the house. He rented an apartment near his work and made the best of it, but he was terribly disappointed. Clearly, he and I had something to talk over. He told me that when he was drinking, sometimes he'd become violent, never striking his wife but displaying fits of anger, throwing furniture and such. I was taken aback. He had not mentioned this before. He had done none of this since getting sober, but apparently his wife had not forgotten and was not forgiving him his trespasses.
He was coping fairly well with that disappointment when he met with a real tragedy. He had been having certain respiratory symptoms, and after extensive testing, he learned that he had a very rare disease of the lungs, and the doctors gave him 6 months to live. What followed was the bravest display of acceptance I've seen. In AA, we usually close our meetings with the Serenity Prayer. It's a powerful prayer, and most AAs know it by heart. John clearly was facing something he could not change, but he was practicing acceptance. In this, he had very little help from me and much more from his priest in the Episcopal Church. She met with him several times, and when the prognosis proved correct 6 months later, delivered his eulogy. Friends and co-workers also came up to say a few words, and the praise they gave him was amazing.
At the service, I met his parents for the first time. They knew who I was and what small part I had played in his life. His father was himself sober in AA 25 years. He was confined to a wheelchair due to emphysema, and he reached up and grasped my hand tightly. Then he said something I will never forget. "Thank you for helping John find God." I was dumbstruck. I didn't know what to say, so I simply gripped his hand in return. At this time, I had been sober 3 years, and I was searching for a God or a higher power of my own. To the extent that I had helped introduce John to the AA program, perhaps I'd helped him find his God after all, even if I was not yet sure of my own.
Only a month later, I buried my father. His death was not unexpected and was the last. I got to start over. I'm sorry.
It's all good, brother.
Only a month later, I buried my father. My first thought was he dead?
What is he, a set of fucking car keys?
All right, I got it all the way through. Only a month later, I buried my father. His death was not unexpected, and for the last months he was alive, he almost always was asleep. He had been diagnosed with lymphoma 2 years earlier, and during that time, he got around a little. One day, I took him and Mom for a ride in the country. From the rear of the car, I heard my father say, apropos of nothing, in a plaintive tone, "I should have taken you fishing more often." Dad had worked hard every day, often into the evening. He did not have much time for me growing up. Some of the best times we did have together were when he took me fishing. For those few words from the back of the card, it was clear how much he loved me.
My mother bore it better than I thought she should. They'd been married 53 years, and she always looked up to him as the strong one. Yet after his death, I witnessed more self-sufficiency in her than I would have thought possible. Through great good fortune, her apartment was right across the street from a senior center. She knew many people there and had lunch with them every day. I resolved to phone my mother every day to give her support. After a while, she told me I didn't have to. My mother tended to repeat herself, and I used to get annoyed with calling her every day. Yet something odd happened. I began to look forward to our conversations. I enjoyed hearing her lively descriptions of the characters she knew at the center. What I thought would be a chore became something I looked forward to every day.
12 years after my father passed, my mother was nearing 87 and got pneumonia. She moved into my house where I could look after her. I found a senior apartment residence for her only 2 miles from my house. She liked it and was looking forward to moving there. She was always outgoing, and I had no doubt that she would soon make friends. She would be starting a whole new life. I took her back to her apartment and left her there to pack for the move. It had been my practice to phone her at 5 p.m. every day. On this day, I called her at noon. Shortly afterward, a neighbor found her unconscious on the floor, a pair of socks in her hand, ready to place in the open suitcase. She was rushed to the hospital and died without regaining consciousness. If I had not called her earlier that day, I would have missed talking to her one last time. Her passing was so sudden, I was sad and depressed for months afterwards.
I'm so grateful that both of my parents got to see me sober. When I first joined AA, my father would ask if I was still going to those meetings. After a few months, he stopped asking, and I asked him a question. Had he noticed any change in me? He thought for a moment and replied, "You seem happier." He could not have given a better answer because I knew that was all he ever wanted for me. My mother, too, noticed a change. She said, "You got sweet again." I'm so grateful to have had such wonderful, loving parents. Because of this program, I got to be there for them as they'd always been there for me.
Oh my God, you got sweet again. What a wonderful thing for a mother to say.
Yeah. My grandparents died within the first year and a half or so of my sobriety. So,
Hmm.
except for like a couple rare, like brief visits, they never got to really see the transformation.
Right.
And I'll always regret that. But both of my parents are still around and, they've got their issues with me, but not the issues we used to have. And like,
Yeah.
I'm super grateful for that.
I'm just respectful for you and for the author of this article. I'm very respectful and of just the fact that there you have that relationship with your parents. You know, it's like I did not, and I had one of those in our family. Once you got out of the house, you had only an obligatory uh, relationship with mom and dad, and you did what you needed to do, and you came back for the holidays and did that kind of stuff. But it wasn't a real, it was, it doesn't mean you don't have real feelings for each other, but it wasn't actually an adult relationship. And that's what, I heard Joe Cruz, Sharon Wexler Cruz's wife and co-founder of Onsite, years ago, and Dee Dee and I were at one of their programs, talk about families, and they said, Joe said, people don't think about it, but when you're raising kids, you're not really raising kids, you're raising adults. He said because he said if life expectancy being what you want it to be, what you hope it will be, and what it probably will be, is the greatest amount of time, the greatest number of years that you're going to have a relationship with your children is when they're adults. They're going to be adult relationships with you. So, that 20 years of their growing up, when you're raising kids, I think it just seems like that's the time. But I've watched that through the years as I've grown up and then grown older, and watched the people whose parents brought them up in that way, where they have that relationship as adults. And it's like, it doesn't mean I get it. I mean, and I've talked to lots of people about this through the years. So without even being a parent, I know that, your parents look at you, they still see their little boy. I get that. But there's much more on top of that at this point. There is a relationship that you have. I just know, I don't know your parents, but I know from you talking about that is an adult relationship, and this article really has that. I mean, and I think of that as a very clear reflection of maturity. That and I don't think as recovering alcoholics we have a corner on that brand of maturity, but I do think that where we may not have had the opportunity before, our program does give us kind of a leg up to be conscious of that. And I mean, I would look to you to say more about that because I would imagine your relationship with your parents is improved and will continue to improve, not just because you're sober, but because of your program, because of the way you think about life.
I don't have a real 9 to 5 type job. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
freelancer and I don't
Mm-hmm.
make a ton of money, but I'm kind of subsidized in like my rent situation and whatnot. I do have to look at like kind of the way that I do my program as a bit of a luxury because like I just have so much time to do it that other people don't
Mm-hmm.
have that need to grind. And I'm still a little ingrate about like, all the things that I don't have, and the prestige, the money, the
Hmm.
whatever,
Hmm.
and I think like what this arose from me thinking about was a conversation with my girlfriend who does
Hmm.
grind. And I think that what she said to me was that like she would like to have the time to kind of work on her spiritual program that I have.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think that like the best way I can think of to respond to something like that is, well, that's my gratitude, or like I that's something that I need to remain connected to my gratitude about that, because it is really nice. It's lovely to be able to do a podcast, and a podcast that people actually listen to.
Hmm.
I've got a friend who's been doing like a movie podcast for the last few months, and
Hmm.
it pains him because he's working very hard on it, and it's just really hard in the algorithm and stuff to kind of like get people to listen. And because of the work that you've done that has a following, the work that Allen does that has a following, and kind of like our fellowshipping and our groups and stuff that we began during COVID. People have been kind of like brought into this show, and I go to a different country and I hear from people that have been listening and stuff. And I'm going to take that ball, that spiritual program
Hmm.
that I'm able to, and the time I'm able to spend on people, on making phone calls,
Hmm.
I look at it as a luxury, and it's something that I get to do, not something that like
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
resigned to. And I don't know, I guess what made me think of that, we were talking about parents because of their struggle and because of
Hmm.
all the things that have happened to us in our relationship. This is the life that I get to have. And maybe it's not the life that they envisioned for me. I'm pretty damn sure actually that like when I was a baby, when I was a baby in their arms, they were just like, well, this guy's going to become a drug addict and crash and burn, but he's going to he's going to sponsor people, and he's going to go to meetings, and he's going to do a recovery podcast, because at that
Yeah.
point
And
podcasts didn't
then
exist. And
and he could just wander around, kind of, bumping into things and just seeing what happens.
yeah,
Yeah.
Like Kane in Kung Fu,
Okay. So people listen to us?
believe it or not.
Damn. That makes me nervous. Now
Yeah,
I
yeah.
need.
Those couple of you that are out there, we love you very much.
That's right. We appreciate our listener.
Yeah. Our listener, patient zero. Yeah.
That's right. We love it.
One thing that really pinged when we read this, the sponsor who didn't have a good God sense, he was faking it until he makes it with his
Mm.
sponsee, and he was kind of like acting as if, yeah, that is absolutely what I do.
When I heard that, I wouldn't have just put that into a fake it till you make it, because I think that kind of minimizes it. What I would say instead, another way of looking at it, is that his sponsee's father was able to see God and see God and God connection in the sponsor, in the author. Just because I'm not aware of something about me doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So what is a connection to God? Well, it's congruence to me. I'm living in connection to nature. I mean, I've been reading some Ralph Waldo Emerson and some Thoreau lately. It's like, when they talk about living in connection to nature, they don't just mean living outdoors, and they don't mean just living in the cabin. They mean the nature of mankind, the nature of humanity. And to me, that's where God, is. And so I maybe a bigger deal than that is, but what I would say is, if I were to put myself into that conversation with those, I would want the author to know, no, he's just telling you he sees God in you where you don't necessarily see it in yourself.
If we're learning something from it, if we're adding it to our program and we're kind of
Mhm.
making that positive change, like he's gonna phone his mother every day.
In order to claim something as a success or a failure, and you get this because you're a screenwriter, you have to do that episodically. It's like, what depends on where you punctuate the episode. As corny as it sounds, the truth is, learn from failure, it becomes success. It's always what we do next. That's one of the many ways of applying what I think of as applying the philosophy of emotional sobriety. It's like, how do I take this sort of perspective, this worldview, and put it and work it into my life? It's the way I perceive it. It's sort of like what I was saying about whether, that I might perceive God in you when you're, as far as you're just faking it till you make it.
The things you learn in the meetings and the way you live your life and the kind of spiritual program, Like, what does
Okay.
that mean? What does that mean to people who have
Mm.
no idea what it is? And how do you bring it like
Yes.
outside that little hermetic seal? I had kind of like raised my relationships and my life to the ground at the time that I began this process. So that necessitated for like the first few years of recovery that like my world was mostly just those rooms and those people and everybody that was kind of like intimately connected with like 12 step and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. And now it's starting, it's things have expanded and I'm meeting like normal people.
We can even translate it to a different language, so it doesn't always have to be a recovery language. It's just every single day of our lives, we're trying to stay awake and we're doing our best to become better people. Recovering people, we don't have a corner on that market. That's something that the entire human race can use. You know, they don't have to come our way. They don't have to be a part of our addiction thinking recovery community. And I like what you're talking about because basically you get into recovery and you do this work so that you can rejoin. You don't not just to stay over here in our little clique, but to rejoin the human race and to be productive and to be helpful, to be our best selves in that, and to be of service. Marcus Aurelius talks about, his job every day is to get up and be his best self, and he defines that as taking good care of himself and being of service to others. That was long before 12 steps, but it's exactly what we practice every day.
Well, right, and because of our disease, it may seem more acute, I suppose, to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, our
Mm-hmm.
focus on it because it needs to be because we need to drive hard in the opposite direction from where our disease is leading us, right? And that's kind of
Yeah, well, and the other piece about like doing therapy, being a therapist is not just does not just do addiction stuff. It's like this. I did a workshop I probably ought to pull it out and dust it off sometime. A workshop called "Addiction is the Best Metaphor for the Human Condition." No, I wrote it better than I can say it. It says, note about recovery. Throughout this book, I use the word recovery to refer to a new path by those of us who have become dissatisfied enough with our old circular paths to venture out, risking the letting go of old ways and experimenting with new. So now notice there's no reference at that point to addiction. It's just recovery. The word recovery has become a natural part of my vocabulary as a recovering alcoholic and a recovering codependent. But the word has come to mean much more to me than a simple reminder of where I have been: alcoholism, dysfunctional and irresponsible behaviors. It speaks to me of where I am bound. It is not enough for me to hold my focus on these conditions and behaviors I am recovering from. The miracle of new paths I have taken and continue to take one day at a time is found in that I am in the is what I am in the process of discovering of myself. Literally the me that I am recovering, meaning regaining. It is not necessary that you, the reader, share with me the identification of alcoholism or codependency in order to identify with this generic use of the word recovery. Herein, recovery simply means possessing the courage to let go of old ineffective patterns and of thought and behavior, and a willingness to start fresh.
I love how
I think
expansive that is. Yeah.
if I'm using the terms addiction and recovery, I got to stop and I got to do a little bit of disclaiming to that because people will automatically think, understandably, that I'm likening them to myself as an alcoholic, for instance. It's like, you know, so what I end up talking to people about in therapy a lot of times is one of the I love recommending to people that they make lists. There are a lot of lists you can make, but one kind of list is a list that you put somewhere in some journal, someplace that you can always know where it is, and you go back and you add to it. And one of those lists is things I'm recovering from. And that list continues to grow. It's what you recover there. So there's two. I'm recovering from, and then I'm regaining. Things I'm recovering from are, so that also includes my depression, my issues with anxiety, that in my low self-esteem, that should monster in my head, all those things, those go on. And so the whole concept, the metaphor of addiction, and I guess the metaphor is not addiction, it's so much addiction recovery. It applies to all of those things, and and they work the exact same way. We use the same principles that we use for you and I to stay sober and clean.
I need to get that list going. It'll be pretty long.
Well, it gets longer, and it's a good thing. It's like well, there's another my favorite list is I think this is in Embracing Fear that I say and talking about my definition, my my older self's definition of wisdom. It's the ever increasing two lists of all that I don't control. And we know that list gets longer and longer and longer as long more we're paying attention, and all that I don't know. And of course, to me, that's understanding those two lists really is probably the best definition for me personally, anyway, of humility. It's like, all that I don't know and all that I don't control. What is that? Well, that's most of everything, And so, and of course, we could look at that, and we deal with that in therapy a lot, where people go, well, that's overwhelming, and I feel so terrible. What I've learned is that no, that's good news, because it means there's very little we control. So we get to focus on that, and only that, and it's that, and the one thing we control is our mind. It's like, and it's doesn't mean we're going to do it perfectly, or that's the goal. But what it means is I get to choose how I interpret the world as it happens to me, and I get to choose how I respond to the world. And those are the things I control every day. If I keep my attention, when my attention drifts away from those two things, it is drifting into things that I cannot control. It is drifting into things that if I say I know, I'm pretending to know.
I'm always just kind of, I think I sometimes I chase rabbits, those rabbits of things that I can't control.
Oh, yeah. We're not going to get rid of anything. We're not going to get rid of any one of these parts of ourselves. What we do is I had a wonderful mentor years ago, long before I was even thinking about recovery of addiction. But he used to just say, in terms of about thinking, we cannot subtract, so we must add. And so, in other words, I can't get rid of this should monster that tells me I'm a piece of shit no matter what I do, and no matter what I do is not good enough. But I can add a new voice that is really there already. It's in an atrophied form. A new voice that basically gives me a counter way of looking at that. That reminds me, that guy is lying to you, and the truth is that basically the main truth is, yeah, whatever you did it, and you did, and whatever you were doing, you actually did it the best you could, and you and I both know, if we tell stories about ourselves honestly, often, I mean, most of the times, we're telling things the best we could do. We go like, well, the best I could do at that time it really sucked. It came up short, but it was the best I could do. So therefore, I'm choosing to not listen to the judgment of that. I was, say, I think that's one of those essential reminders. I have that actually on my wall at my office. It says essential reminders. Never judge an earlier version of yourself by what you know today. And it's like, it seems simple enough. It's easy to just nod your head and agree to that, but put that into practice, it's going to make a difference for you. And it's hard to do, because we have the automatic judging going on, because it's been so well rehearsed through the years.
As with negative voices and negative energy, positive voices, positive energy percolates, and it builds.
Yes, repetition, because I always tell people, if you don't believe in affirmations, and I first wanted to laugh at stupid affirmations like like Stuart Smalley, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. The word affirm just means to make firm. So I always tell people, if you don't believe in the power of affirmation, think of the most negative thought you have about yourself that you repeat over and over and over again in your head, and tell me how well affirmations work. It's like, I mean, they're wonderful. They're beautiful. And what we have to do is understand that the way they work is the way any recovery works, is through repetition. And yeah, so what you're saying, be aware of it, and then what do you do? Well, I got to do it again and again and again and again, and that's why just saying, let's look at the things that we can control and get up every day and just focus on those repeatedly is a practice of recovery. And basically what we're trying to do is keep ourselves too busy to even be distracted by the rabbits, you
Yeah.
know, that are going to try to distract us.
Busyness helps with that a lot, I find.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we're also talking about ways to keep ourselves busy in a productive way. If I'm reminding myself, you know, if I could just have something as simple as my job today is to be the best version of myself, I can revisit that question throughout the day and try to make that a habit now, a new habit, so that basically, so the many times that I lose my place and I wander off, it brings me back to focus. With practice, we do get better. You know, we may not be the best ever. You know, I may not be you know, if I wanted to learn to play the piano, you know, and I got somebody to teach me to play the piano, it's not a matter of whether I had the greatest teacher in the world. It's a matter of whether I'm willing to practice whatever I learn. Now, does that tell you what quality or what level of talent I have? No, but that's a fact. That's science. If I practice, I will get better. And if I don't, and this is true with recovery, you know, all the time. It's like how many people, you know, come to meetings, come to therapy, listen to this kind of stuff, and then don't do anything with it. You know, it's like you and I both have long histories, I think, in our lives of demonstrating that knowing things and not doing anything with them is useless.
Faith without works is dead.
I've demonstrated that repeatedly in my life. I'm sure I still will do that at the times that I need to be reminded of. But it's like certainly before I ever got started, or you ever got started with you know, sincere, genuine recovery, we learned things and we thought we could apply them just by knowing them. We thought the concept would help us.
I thought there was a number of drinks that would work.
Yeah, me too. I did.
Just one more. This'll fix it.
Yeah, it didn't, but I did. It did help me eventually, you know, go to sleep.
Yeah, it never failed at that for me anyway.
That's right. Me neither.
But all right. Well, hey, you know, it's thanks so much for hanging with me and doing this. And I don't want to count my chickens before they're hatched, but this time next week will be 6 years of continuous sobriety, one day at a time. 1 minute at a time, 1 hour at a time. But next week we'll be talking to Joe C. And listener, our single,
our listener, yeah,
our beautiful listener. We will see you then.
All right.
Tend your life, tend your myth, cultivate your narrative with whomever you